Finally, we are ready to tackle the ending of the Forgotten Saga game mode for Assassin's Creed Valhalla in the second part of our dedicated story analysis. In this video, we're going to discuss all the cutscenes involving Odin, Thor and Freyja, including an interesting one featuring a calculation that we are going to explain, before moving on to the ending of the game mode, the hidden meanings it has, and the potential repercussions it can have on Eivor's final chapter that is going to release at the end of the year. So no time to waste, and let's dive into the second part of our analysis of the Forgotten Saga game mode for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So we pick up where we left off, with Odin reaching the final area of the simulation, ready to face its ruler, Hel, that he himself supposedly trapped inside of it. Beating her would lead to the ending, yes, but before we get to that, there's a lot of information and story that can be witnessed when Odin actually fails his confrontation with Hel. As a matter of fact, a good chunk of the story of this DLC is told through the fail states, that is, when Odin is defeated, he is taken back to his camp by Hel, mind you. You can see the branches in every cutscene, meaning the Hel is not really kicking out, but gently putting Odin out of the simulation, and every time this happens, the game mode triggers a new cutscene that updates us on the proceedings in the real world, with characters like Thor and Freyja joining Odin in the area where he decided to enter and hack Hel's simulation. Now, maybe it's just my feeling, but I believe that despite the introduction already at the beginning of the game mode, we were actually starting in the middle of things, where the loop of entering and exiting the simulation was already well underway. We can see that in a few occasions, like the first encounter with Hel at the first boss area, where she is saying, "Why are you returning, old one?" or the multiple times where Odin says that what he has experienced or is seeing seems familiar. And in a bigger way, we'll see it when Odin talks about having a faint memory or a vision of Baldr before we as players actually saw the full extent of it, meaning that Odin had already seen it before that point, and we'll see it even more when Thor is seemingly trying to tell him multiple times about Baldr and the events shown in the game mode ending that I would imagine Odin told him about in one of the previous runs, but he supposedly was bound to an oath that Odin himself asked him to undertake, an oath that supposedly required Thor not to tell Odin about Baldr in the subsequent runs of the simulation, but we'll get back to that later. In the first of these fail-state cutscenes, we can see Odin expressing his rage, once again confirming he had created Niflheim and thus beyond the mythological veil that he was the creator of the simulation, and that is where he's joined by Thor, who actually is bringing news from home, as the war that Loki was organizing against the Asgardian Isu that Juno mentioned in the secret ending of the Dawn of Ragnarok DLC is about to hit Asgard, while Odin is kept busy here, trying to find Baldr's consciousness. Odin answers by showing his arrogant side that is classic from the Norse mythology, saying that he knows better and that he will go into the simulation as many times as it takes in order to find Baldr. Keep this in mind as it will be important later, but what's interesting here is that the story confirms once again that Thor is Odin's son, even within the Isu story, and also that Baldr is his stepbrother, meaning that while Baldr's mother was Frigg, Thor's mother was Freyja, once again mirroring the Norse mythology. The second of the failed run scenes shows Odin a little more in pain but still vigorously angry, screaming at Hel in the simulation, and here Thor stops him by saying that he's heard Odin's angry runs too many times, another hint at how we are not seeing each and every time Odin enters and is pushed out of the simulation, and in this situation Thor asks Odin to release him from his oath, while Odin doesn't actually seem to remember what oath he supposedly asked him to undertake. That's another example of how Hel's tampering with Odin's memories is actually affecting him. Thor says within the mythological veil that he swore on his upcoming battle with Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent and son of Loki, and that saying what the oath is would mean to break it, which possibly proves that he swore not to talk about Baldr and the events shown during the ending of the game mode, to which Odin wonders whether breaking such oath would sow doubt in his mind. It certainly would, knowing what Baldr told him, as we'll see, which is why eventually Thor doesn't break his oath, meaning that Odin at this stage keeps trying to hack the simulation. In the third failed attempt, Odin's rant towards Hel is interrupted by Freyja, who has joined Thor and is coming from Asgard trying to stop Odin from his obsession about Baldr, especially because she has heard that the Greco-Roman Isu have been talking with the North African ones and their war on Asgard along with Loki's forces is imminent. Odin dismisses this by saying that Tyr can take care of the matter as he had been warlord of Asgard in the past. I'd imagine that to be the leading position in Asgard, considering that Freyja says that he'll take that title again if Odin is not careful enough and keeps dabbling with his obsession, which is currently still having the best of him as he plainly states that he doesn't care about the war about to happen in his territories, once again remembering seeing Baldr's dead body, which is another direct hint at this being a sequel to the Dawn of Ragnarok DLC. But it is on this occasion that Odin says that he actually saw Baldr on Hel's throne, and when he's questioned about this, his memory becomes hazy. He can't really remember how he saw it, nor where he saw that, and it's because of this faint memory and the mystery tied to it that Freyja decides to stay. But it's also worth mentioning that once again Odin is talking of something he saw but the players haven't yet, because this, at least in my case, happened before I beat the game mode, so this shows how there have been many more reruns of the simulation that we haven't seen, some of which had Odin actually reach the end, find Baldr and talk to him before his memory got erased, but not completely, and that's how he had Thor undertake his oath, and also how he still vaguely remembered seeing Baldr at the end of the simulation. It wasn't a vision, but a memory that he already had. In the fourth failed run scene, we actually see Freyja trying to do her work as a seeress, which beyond the mythological veil could very well be like her running a calculation. So in this calculation she sees Hel, she sees a throne in a dark room that would be where Baldr sits, and we'll see what that dark room is later, a king or a queen with their heart filled with light, that would be Baldr of course, then a sacrifice made which would be the price to be paid, and such sacrifice would be that one quote-unquote prince would be found while another one would be bound. And this is a direct reference to the ending, where through Hel Odin finally finds Baldr in the quote-unquote dark room, so that's the prince found, while he also learns that he will not be able to keep the memory of him and thus will go back outside the simulation, once again willing to find him as part of an endless loop, and that's our prince bound to run the simulation over and over and over again. The fifth failed attempt scene is quite peculiar because it looks like when Odin was defeated, Freyja from outside the simulation felt some kind of push, a forceful presence coming from the simulation, and she felt it in her mind. And it seems like that was Hel from within the simulation trying to test the boundaries of the simulation itself, here called the warding wall. And right away we see a bigger display of this, where apparently Hel can manifest her voice from within the simulation. We see here that her voice comes from the tree that Odin gets out of every time he is kicked out of the simulation, and she is saying that that's a way to test the waters, as she seems to have found a crack in the borders of the simulation, a way for her and other consciousnesses to get out after being trapped in there. Odin tries to make it quick, asks her to release Baldr so things can end soon, but that doesn't seem to be Hel's plan, as apparently in all the runs of the simulation, Hel is learning more about Odin and Asgard, which is intel that she and her father Loki could use in the war, because yes, despite what we might see in the ending of the mode, let's not forget that she's Loki's daughter. Her full name is even mentioned in a document, Hel, Loki's daughter, and she has been rallied by her father to march on Asgard for the upcoming Isu Civil War. As we saw, she might actually be able to participate in the war led by his father if she were able to break the boundaries of the simulation so that her and other consciousnesses could actually be released in the world, so that's still something that might happen after the events of Forgotten Saga, as we'll see later. Eventually Freyja is able to stop Hel's attempt, but while it seemed like a hostile move by Hel, Freyja also sensed that Hel might have been afraid of what Odin could finally discover, that is, what he was bound to see at the end of the simulation. So this pushes Odin once again to enter and hack the simulation, even if they now know that this hacking activity is straining the boundaries of the simulation itself, potentially to a breaking point. In the sixth and final failed attempt cutscene, we see Odin visibly more hurt coming out of the simulation, with both Freyja and Thor worrying about him. He talks about meeting and fighting Hel and her hound Garmr, potentially meaning that this cutscene only unlocks by dying in Hel's final fight, and at this stage actually Freyja suggests not to enter the simulation anymore, because it seems like the simulation is quote-unquote infecting them with the madness, which I'd imagine to be the same as the push that she felt before, which I'm not too sure how to interpret beyond the mythological veil. It seems to be a kind of influence that the simulation appeared to have on the people staying in the proximity of the device where the simulation was hosted. The two of them discuss more about the vision of Baldr that Odin thinks he had, which he now acknowledges to be a faint memory, so much so that players are even shown a snippet of it with Baldr on the throne holding an evil smirk for some reason. Odin says that his memory is clouded though, he can't recall more details, and that's once again because Hel has been concealing part of the memories Odin makes during the various reruns of the simulation, hiding the truth that at this point Odin had apparently already told Thor about Baldr, but then eventually forgot. So Odin is resolved to continue with his obsession, but Freyja is feeling the influence that Hel and the simulation seem to have on her, so she decides to go back to Asgard. And so we have seen the lead up to Odin's fight with Hel within the simulation. We have seen what happens when Odin loses, when he's not able to hack enough of the simulation to get to its end. But of course what matters the most is what happens when he does win the fight, when he does get to the end. And when he does, Hel confirms that she was actually executing a plan aimed at separating Odin's memory from him without destroying him, that is, wiping his memory without affecting him directly, and in a surprising reveal, she states that this plan was actually Baldr's idea, who only left the execution to her with the concession of not killing Odin. So of course Odin is surprised by this, asking what she can gain from all of that, and Hel once again surprises by saying that she was actually so drawn to Baldr's purity that she could forget about all the death around her and thus actually supported his plan. So here we see Hel in a totally different perspective. While she's still supposed to be part of Loki's forces in the attack to Asgard, and we have seen she's still somewhat working towards that, her actions here within the entire game mode are fully oriented towards Baldr, the purest of the Asgardians. But of course, as Hel predicted in one of the previous encounters, Odin wouldn't accept this, unless it came from Baldr's lips directly, and that's what Hel arranges. So look closer here, we are shifting environments. Odin's digital persona is taken away from the Niflheim simulation, and again, in my interpretation, he is brought onto a different dimension, a dark environment where Baldr is residing alone, and thus another digital environment where his consciousness is actually located. And we have already seen a dark location where more than a consciousness was residing. That was the Grey, and it was employed by Juno, Basim, and Desmond, and thus it looks like Baldr's consciousness here is also located in such dimension. So our digital Odin and Baldr's consciousness finally meet in the Grey, which Baldr calls his sanctuary, and apparently he is going to use this dimension, this digital shelter, until the quote-unquote end of this world, which pretty much means that Baldr, at least the copy of his consciousness that was entrusted to Hel, has decided to stay as a digital entity in the Grey, at least until the Toba catastrophe hits the Earth, which is here called the end of the world. So Odin tries to confront Baldr, asking him whether it was actually his idea to wipe Odin's memory every time he tried to access the simulation, and Baldr confirms it all, but apparently it wasn't for a negative purpose. In fact, Baldr states that in order to fulfill his destiny, his quote-unquote enemies have to think that he is dead and he can't risk anyone knowing the truth, not even from Odin. So to sum up until now Baldr's body has died, but his consciousness was either duplicated or separated in two parts. One of these was stored in the Salakar artifact, the other was put in Hel's hands by Surtur and maybe Loki himself. Baldr and Hel were supposed to be on two wildly different factions, especially considering that Loki betrayed Baldr in the events shown in the Forgotten Myths comics before the events shown in the Dawn of Ragnarok DLC, but Hel's intents possibly shifted when she interacted with Baldr's consciousness and purity, and this is where Baldr might have concocted his plan. He had to survive the Toba catastrophe in order to bring his quote-unquote light to the world after Eve was going to be hit by the Toba catastrophe that would have consumed and destroyed everything and everyone on Earth. In our recent analysis of the Dawn of Ragnarok DLC, we even mentioned that there was at least one document featuring a calculation by an Isu scholar that predicted that Baldr would have survived and might have even been resurrected, as it was also the case in the Norse mythology. But Baldr wanted nobody to know about this because of these enemies that he is mentioning. Now, we don't know who these enemies are, but it is likely that they are not Isu that are currently alive, because when Odin proposes to kill them all, Baldr states that it is not his fight and that the struggle that he is going to have against these enemies will surely stretch beyond Odin's final battle, that is the fight against the combined forces of Loki, the Greco-Roman Isu and the North African ones as the Toba catastrophe hits the Earth. So we can imagine these enemies to not have been born yet, or their seeds to have been just sown or about to be sown. Because it's talking about a long-lasting struggle, Baldr could be talking about the everlasting war between the Assassins and Templars, the Hidden Ones and the Order of the Ancients before them, and the organizations and/or ideas that preceded them. Assassin's Creed 2 made it clear that the seeds of the Templar Order dated back to Cain after he killed Abel, so maybe Baldr's effort here is aimed at surviving the Toba catastrophe while sitting comfortably in the digital networks that make up the Grey, and then somehow come back to create the seeds that would lead to the Assassins, whose ideology already lied within Adam and Eve, but maybe Baldr would step in to make it so that even at that time the Assassin ideology could counter the Templar one supported by Cain and his followers. Or maybe Baldr is talking about a more evolved version of the Templar ideology when he's talking about the enemies that he has to fight. Maybe he is planning to stay in the Grey for far longer and to only appear when the Order of the Ancients is reformed into the Templar Order, that is in Eivor's time, and that would once again make it so that Eivor could meet Baldr in the Grey in the last chapter of her story, where Odin could finally meet his son again, in a way, while Baldr could also provide Eivor with a warning about the Templar Order. Or maybe again, a lot of you in the comments and also on social media in general are expecting Baldr to actually side with or support the Templars instead of the Assassins. That'd be surprising to me, but it would be a shocker for sure. Another idea is that Baldr could have stayed in the Grey way beyond that time period and might actually appear in the modern day, though it would feel a little weird that he stayed in the Grey all this time and didn't try to stop neither Juno nor Basim, who were both operating from there. Whatever the case, Baldr is very clear. Odin's fight is not his and vice versa, and nobody should know that he's alive and has a plan, not even learn it by chance from Odin, and that's why he's having Hel wipe his memory at every run of the Niflheim simulation, which is also a bit weird. He doesn't trust his father with the information, but he trusts Hel. Maybe he didn't tell her the full extent of his plan. Anyway, Odin is still a little incredulous about Baldr's plans and wonders if that did not work, what would happen, and that's where Baldr counters by saying, "You must sacrifice Muninn." And at face value, this doesn't seem to have any meaning, but you might remember in the first part of this analysis, we established that Muninn is a representation within the mythological veil of Odin's active memory. By saying this, Baldr is saying that Odin has to sacrifice his own memory of this talk with him, the memory of the final time he saw his son before the catastrophe, and this of course leads to a heartfelt moment. Odin is incredulous he has to leave the memory of his son being actually alive behind, so Baldr tries to calm him down. Baldr will keep Odin's memories of this last talk with him, he will save them, he will keep Muninn, so to speak, and in exchange he will gift his father with a new raven, Synin, to look forward. Now again, at face value this looks silly. How is Synin 75,000 years old, right? But again, remember, this is not physical, this is something happening in the digital world and with the mythological veil on top of it. If Muninn represents Odin's memory, that is the ability to look at the past and the death of Baldr that he obsessively wanted to undo, Synin, according to Baldr, represents Odin's way to look forward, to stop trying to resurrect Baldr, who didn't even want that, and instead to look to the future, to his use of the seventh method and his reincarnation. So what better symbol than the raven that Odin's reincarnation will be bonded to represent Odin's will to look to his own future. Maybe it's just me and my interpretation, but I did enjoy the writing and the symbolism here. Odin then tells Baldr there's so much he would like to tell him, but his son basically tells him that this talk, this final goodbye, has already happened multiple times, because again, we as players are not seeing all the runs and iterations of the simulation where Odin has failed, but also all the runs where Odin has succeeded. But Odin doesn't yield, a grieving father who can't let his son go. He tries to get closer to him, but Baldr seems to be controlling the Grey, and the entire digital space seems to move with Odin, who is literally no closer than he was before. This is another heartfelt moment for me. Baldr has to say no to his father even as he's begging because of his self-imposed mission. While Odin's world belongs to the darkness, he says, which beyond the mythological veil means while the world is bound to be hit by the Toba catastrophe and most entities are going to die, he must bring light to a new age. That is his plan. His objective is something else entirely, which is bound to happen after the Toba catastrophe and is supposed to have a positive tinge, as he is talking about light as opposed to danger. It could be helping or fostering the diffusion of assassin-based ideas in the early years after the Isu era, as we said earlier, or helping the humans rebuild after the Toba catastrophe, or something else entirely. I reckon we might know more about this when Eivor's final chapter is released at the end of the year. When Odin finally realizes that he can't do anything about this, he directly asks Baldr to rip every feeling for his son away from him, otherwise his life will be unbearable. But Baldr, an almost crying Baldr, says that Odin will be able to bear it, and thus only his memory of this encounter is wiped once again, and Hel gently escorts him out of the simulation as we read the final Saga page, confirming that Baldr's final words faded from Odin memories, the keyword being final here, as there wouldn't be any more goodbyes, any more encounters with his son within the Grey. But this meant that Odin was once again going back to square one, to one of the countless times where he decided once again to push back and jump into the simulation again to find his son enraged like a roaring flame. And this leads to the final cutscene in Odin's camp, where Thor reaches Odin, and this time he is visibly confused and deep in thought, and it's only when Thor mentions Baldr that Odin wakes up from his thoughts with his memory wiped and back to its original state, stating that he's there to rescue Baldr and wondering wondering if Thor is there to help, and you might have noticed, because his memory has been wiped, Odin is having the same reactions, the same line of dialogues that he had in the first interaction that he had with Thor. And Thor recognizes this. He again sees that something is wrong with him. He even tries to tell him about Baldr, something that Odin apparently did know, but Thor is bound by his own oath, and Odin doesn't want to hear it anyway. And so once again, as it happened at the start of the game mode, Thor asks, "You will be going back then?" And Odin once again answers, "As many times as it takes," in a sorrowful moment that is repeated over and over. From this moment on, Odin can get to the end of the simulation again, hoping to get Baldr, but the endings are not quite the same. That was their final goodbye, and so the other endings only involve Hel. One of them has Hel more or less calling Odin mad because he keeps doing this over and over regardless of the result, while he can't really fight the land, that is, he can't really fight the simulation that can still easily get hold of him and expel him even if he was its own creator. In another ending, the two of them bicker, saying that they are both studying each other for the upcoming war that will take place in Asgard as the Toba catastrophe hits the earth, and that we'll see them on opposite sides, which kinda confirms that Hel is still somewhat aligned with her father and against Odin. After all, she did try to break the boundaries of the simulation, and she conceded to not kill Odin only at Baldr's request, meaning that, as we mentioned, she might still be very hostile towards Odin and the Asgardian Isu, despite having temporarily sided with Baldr. Another ending shows Hel flexing her power in front of Odin, which doesn't have a particular effect on him, and that's pretty much it for the potential endings of the game mode and the story contained in them, which still bears some questions such as when did Odin get out of this sort of eternal loop and how long did he stay in there? Because these events are happening not so much time before the Toba catastrophe, and we do know that at some point Odin had to go to Asgard to actually use the Seven Method, fight the war, die at the hands of the Isu Fenrir, and be then reborn again as Eivor, Varin's daughter. I guess that at some point he was dragged away from the simulation or something. Another question would be, are there any more Odin stories to tell at this point? Because we have already seen the Seven Method cutscene, and that is where the flow of Odin's genetic memory stops within Eivor, this is very likely the last we'll hear of Odin in the Isu era, unless thanks to some narrative trick we get to see what happens after the Asgardian Isu left the Seven Method chamber to face their end. Otherwise, it's very likely that the next time we're going to see Odin might be in Eivor's final chapter at the end of the year, which should tie up all the narrative threads involving Eivor for sure, but also if my theory about why Eivor is going to end up in Vinland still holds, it will also hold a final meeting between Odin and Baldr on the far side of their doom after they both somehow survived the Toba catastrophe. And if you'd like to know more about that theory and why based on it Eivor will end up in Vinland again, you can check our video dedicated to it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.